The porcelain cup shattered on the marble floor, splashing hot coffee across my shoes. "You idiot!" Mrs. Langford's voice cut through the air like glass. "Do you know how much this rug costs? More than your entire year's salary, if you even make that much." I froze. The lobby of Langford International was a cathedral of wealth-towering glass walls, polished brass rails, fresh orchids flown in every Monday from Singapore. And right there, in front of a crowd of perfectly dressed executives and visiting clients, I stood with a coffee tray trembling in my hands, wearing the company's dark green service uniform. My face burned. She didn't lower her voice. "People like you should stick to cleaning floors, not serving coffee where real business happens." Laughter rippled through the room. Not loud, but enough. The kind that stabs, quick and surgical. I bent down to pick up the shards, feeling every gaze pierce my back. "I'll clean it," I said, my voice steady but low. Mrs. Langford smirked. "Of course you will. That's the only thing you're good for." It wasn't the first time she had humiliated me, but this one was different. The public cruelty, the smirks, the expensive heels clicking away from me, as though my existence was a stain on her air. It lit something in me. Not rage. Not yet. Something quieter, colder. I finished cleaning the floor and returned to the staff corridor, where the smell of bleach clung to everything. There, away from the glass walls and designer smiles, the building hummed with the real workers, cleaners, cooks, maintenance staff. We moved like shadows, essential yet invisible. "Are you okay?" Maria, the night shift janitor, asked softly. She was 60, with kind eyes and the strongest hands I'd ever seen. "I'm fine," I lied. "But in truth, Mrs.?" Langford's words replayed in my head over and over. "People like you." She didn't know me. She didn't know what I had seen, what I carried, what I could do if I wanted to. I had been working at Langford International for 8 months. On paper, just another service worker background checks clean, references from other hotels, nothing to notice. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Because while they saw a low-wage nobody, I saw them. Every detail. Every habit. Every careless conversation in the executive lounge when they thought the help couldn't understand or wouldn't matter. That morning, after the coffee incident, I went back to my storage closet, a narrow space lined with cleaning supplies, and a small metal desk no one used but me. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the small leather notebook I always carried. In it, I wrote down the date, time, and every word Mrs. Langford had said. It wasn't just her. Over the months, I had filled pages with overheard conversations, strange transactions, whispers about offshore accounts, and private arrangements. I never sought them out. They just fell into my ears like loose change from careless pockets. That day, though, something shifted. At lunch, I was delivering bottled water to the top-floor boardroom when I heard its voices raised just enough to carry through the half-closed door. "She'll never suspect a thing," a man said. "Of course not. She's too busy playing charity queen," another voice answered. Then laughter, the kind that meant whatever they were discussing was at someone else's expense. I paused, water bottles still in my hands. The door opened suddenly, and I stepped back as Mr. Carlyle, one of the senior partners, brushed past me without so much as eye contact. His cologne was sharp, expensive, and cold. I set the bottles down on the side table, glanced at the scattered documents on the boardroom desk, and felt my pulse pick up. There it was, just a glimpse before I looked away, an email printout with a subject line that made no sense for a legitimate business. Transfer, Cayman. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. My mind worked like a camera. I could remember the placement of every word, every number, without writing it down. When I got back to my closet, I added a new entry to the notebook. My handwriting was small, precise, but my heart was thudding harder than it should have. That night, Maria and I walked to the bus stop together. She told me about her grandson's school project, about how expensive uniforms were. I listened, but my mind kept circling back to Mrs. Langford's voice, dripping with contempt, and to that single word Cayman. The next few weeks, I kept my head down. I cleaned offices, polished glass, brought coffee, and made sure no one looked at me twice. But behind my polite smile, I was collecting snippets of conversations about moving things before the audit. A discarded USB drive in the trash, which I didn't open but kept in a sealed envelope. A photo I took casually, as if testing my phone camera, of a meeting schedule with a name I recognized from the news, tied to money laundering cases. All the while, Mrs. Langford's insults became sharper, as though she enjoyed testing how much I could take before breaking. One afternoon, she cornered me in the executive kitchen. "You should be grateful we let people like you in here at all," she said, swirling her glass of imported water. I tilted my head. "People like me?" She smiled without warmth. "The invisible ones. You clean up after greatness and get paid for it. What more could you want?" That was the moment I knew. She truly believed the world was divided into people who mattered and people who didn't, and she had no idea which one I really was. By the end of my shift, my plan wasn't fully formed, but the shape of it was there. Not revenge. Not even exposure for the sake of justice. Something different. Something that would force them, especially to see me, to recognize that the person they dismissed had been watching the whole time, to make them remember my name. 3 days later, the first crack appeared in their glass tower. It was Thursday morning, and the executive wing buzzed with a tension I hadn't felt before. The usual laughter over overpriced lattes was gone. Instead, voices were low, clipped, urgent. I was wiping down the reception desk when I heard Mr. Carlyle on the phone behind the frosted glass wall of his office. His voice was sharp, like he was holding back anger. "No, you listen to me," he snapped. "It can't be traced back here. If it is, we're finished." I kept my movements slow, steady, as though polishing the same corner of the desk was my only focus. When his office door opened, I turned away, pushing my cart down the hallway. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew something big was happening. And whatever it was, Mrs. Langford was going to be right in the middle of it. That afternoon, I delivered lunch to the private lounge where she sat with 2 women, both dripping in diamonds. "And of course we moved it before the charity inspection," one of them said. "No one checks the offshore donations." Mrs. Langford laughed, the same cruel, effortless laugh she used when mocking me. "Darling, that's the beauty of it. People trust the face, not the hands moving the money." Her words lodged in my chest like a hook. The face, not the hands. That was exactly why they never saw me. As I poured their mineral water, I felt her eyes on me. "Careful this time," she said, her voice honeyed but loud enough for her friends to hear. "We don't want another coffee disaster, do we?" They chuckled. I set the glass down gently. "No, ma'am," I said. My tone was polite, but inside, the decision solidified. They thought I was just the help, but I was going to be the mirror they couldn't avoid, the one that reflected every ugly truth they thought was hidden. That night, in my tiny apartment above a laundromat, I laid everything out on my bed. The notebook, the USB drive, the photo of the meeting schedule, even a crumpled receipt I'd found in the recycling bin for a consulting fee of $75,000 paid to an unregistered company. I didn't know yet how to piece it all together, but I knew I had enough to make them sweat. The next morning, the opportunity found me. I was called to clean the small conference room on the 42nd floor, one I almost never entered because it was used for high-security calls. Inside, the projector was still on, casting the frozen image of a paused video call onto the wall. The participants' names were listed on the side, and one of them made my stomach tighten. Langford Trust, Cayman Branch. I didn't touch the projector, but as I wiped the table, I slid my phone from my pocket, holding it low, and took 3 quick photos. 2 hours later, during my lunch break, I was at the public library, sitting in the farthest corner. Using one of their computers, I opened a private browser window and searched the company name. What I found made the air in my lungs feel heavier. Langford Trust had been quietly flagged by a financial watchdog group 6 months ago, nothing public. Just a mention in a dense report about suspicious international transfers. It was there, in black and white, buried where only someone patient and invisible would find it. The pieces clicked. The charity galas, the offshore accounts, the way they spoke about moving things before inspections. They weren't just rich and cruel. They were laundering money under the cover of philanthropy. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the library around me. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt something colder, clarity. But I also knew something else. If I took this to the authorities now, they'd bury it. Mrs. Langford and her people had enough influence to make evidence disappear and to destroy anyone who dared to challenge them. I needed to be strategic. That evening, back at work, I passed Mrs. Langford in the hallway. She didn't slow down. "Pick up the pace," she said, without looking at me. "We have important guests tonight. I want this place spotless." "Yes, ma'am." Her heels clicked away, and I allowed myself the smallest smile. She had no idea that the invisible person polishing her floors was about to stand in the middle of her world and make sure she saw every single speck of dirt. Over the next week, I built my plan. It wasn't about leaking documents anonymously. I wanted them to know exactly who had done it. But I needed an audience. And then I heard about the gala. Langford International's annual Night of Hope was the perfect stage. Every investor, politician, and media outlet that mattered would be there. Cameras flashing, speeches flowing, champagne endless. Mrs. Langford would be at the center, her reputation glowing like gold leaf under the lights. I just needed to decide when and how to cut it open. The night before the gala, I stayed late at work, pretending to finish cleaning the executive dining area. When the floor was empty, I slipped into the private lounge where Mrs. S. Langford kept her speech notes and event materials. I didn't take anything. I didn't need to. I just looked at the seating chart. My target wasn't her, at least not directly. It was the room itself, the people who protected her, who laughed when she mocked me, who believed in the face and ignored the hands. If I could make them see both at the same time, the illusion would break. On the day of the gala, I woke before sunrise. I ironed my uniform, polished my shoes until I could see my own reflection, and packed the small black folder that held everything I'd collected: copies, photos, summaries. The original materials stayed hidden elsewhere. When I arrived at the event venue, I was just another staff member among dozens. No one looked twice at me. I served champagne, adjusted centerpieces, held open doors for gowns worth more than my annual rent. At 8:15 p.m., the speeches began. Mrs. Langford stood on stage, bathed in warm light, her diamond necklace catching every camera flash. She spoke about compassion, about lifting others up, about the responsibility of the wealthy to care for the less fortunate. Every word tasted like ash in my mouth. When the applause rose, I slipped into the media booth, where a young technician was distracted by a call. My hands moved quickly. I placed a small USB into the main laptop controlling the presentation screens. The first images appeared just as the second round of speeches began. At first, they looked like normal slides charity statistics, smiling children, glowing headlines. But then, without transition, the next slide appeared. A transaction log, dates, amounts, Langford Trust, Cayman Branch. Gasps broke out across the room. Another slide. A screenshot of the email I'd memorized, reproduced exactly as it had appeared on the boardroom desk. Then photos. The meeting schedule. The $75,000 consulting fee receipt. And finally, a transcript of Mrs. Langford's own words. People trust the face, not the hands moving the money. The room was silent, except for the clicking of camera shutters. From the stage, Mrs. Langford's face had gone pale, and I was still just standing there, holding an empty champagne tray. The screen went black. It didn't take long for the murmurs to start low at first, and swelling like a tide. Heads turned toward the stage. Phones were lifted. Some guests whispered to each other in sharp, hurried voices. Others stared openly, the polite mask of wealth slipping into something rawer. Suspicion. Mrs. Langford forced a smile. "It appears there's been a technical error," she said into the microphone, her tone tight. No one believed her. From my spot near the edge of the crowd, I could see her eyes scanning the room, searching for the source. Her gaze swept past me without pause, just another servant blending into the shadows. She didn't know yet, but she would. Security moved quickly, ushering a technician toward the booth. The screen stayed dark, but the damage was done. Guests were already checking their phones, looking up the names and numbers they'd just seen. And the first reporters were whispering into cameras, smelling blood in the water. I slipped away from the crowd and into the hallway that led to the service area. There, I pulled the small black folder from my bag and tucked it into the pocket of a journalist's coat that was hanging on a rack. One I'd seen her place there when she went inside. I made sure the edge was sticking out just enough for her to notice when she came back. Evidence already in the right hands. When I returned to the ballroom, Mrs. Langford was off the stage, surrounded by two of her executives and a security guard. Her voice was sharp. A mask gone now. "Find out who did this," she snapped. "Tonight. Before they leave this building." I took a step closer, pretending to refill a glass of champagne for a nearby guest. "It might be too late for that," one of the executives murmured. The reporters, "Shut up," she hissed. Her eyes darted again through the room. This time they landed on me. "You," she said, pointing with one manicured finger. "Come here." The guests nearest us turned to watch. I walked forward slowly, every step deliberate, my expression neutral. "Yes, Mom?" She looked me up and down like she was checking for dirt under her nails. "What were you doing near the media booth?" "I was serving champagne," I said evenly. Her lips tightened. "Don't play games with me. I've seen the way you look at people. Always listening, always lurking." A few guests leaned in, sensing the scent of drama. The air between us was electric. "I listened because I'm invisible to you," I said quietly enough that only she could hear. "That's how you all are. You talk like no one is listening, but I hear everything." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful," she whispered back. I tilted my head slightly, just enough to let the smallest smile form. Careful was yesterday. I stepped back before she could respond, fading into the service corridor. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, but she didn't follow. Not yet. In the kitchen, the staff buzzed with rumors. Someone had seen the slides. Someone else had overheard a guest talking about police involvement. The sound of clinking glasses and sizzling pans was underscored by the hum of a storm building outside, both literal and metaphorical. At 9:45 p.m., the first journalists left the gala early, clutching their coats and phones, faces set with purpose. I knew the folder had been found. By the time dessert was served, the cracks in Mrs. Langford's perfect facade were deep enough for anyone to see. She smiled too widely, her laugh too high, her hands too still when they should have been gesturing. People noticed. The ones who'd once leaned toward her were now leaning away. I caught her looking at me again. This time, There was no arrogance in her gaze, only calculation. When the event finally wound down, I was in the coachroom, handing out jackets and scarves. Guests filed past with polite smiles, some whispering into their phones, some glancing back toward the ballroom. Then Mrs. Langford appeared, alone. She waited until the last guest left before stepping closer. Her perfume was sharp, suffocating in the small space. "You think this was clever?" she said, her voice low but shaking with controlled rage. "You've ruined your life." "My life?" I said softly. "You mean the life you think I have? The one where I'm nothing but the help?" She leaned in, her eyes cold. "You don't understand the kind of people you're dealing with. This won't touch me. It will crush you." I met her gaze without blinking. "Then I guess we'll see who survives the crush." She stepped back, her expression flickering with something she hadn't expected to feel: uncertainty. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because someone had to," I said. I walked past her and into the service hallway, leaving her standing in the coatroom, the weight of her empire suddenly visible on her shoulders. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked to the end of the street where a small cafe stayed open late. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and watched as black cars pulled away from the venue one by one. Somewhere inside, I knew the real fight hadn't even begun. They would try to bury this, to twist it, to make me disappear in ways that didn't leave marks. But now there were witnesses. Now there were questions. And once questions start, they're hard to kill. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. Not because everyone saw me, now most still didn't know my name, but because I had stepped into the center of their stage and spoken in a language they understood. Proof. And I wasn't done. By morning, the city was buzzing. Not with my name yet, but with the echoes of the gala. 3 different news outlets had run short, clipped stories about unexpected interruptions and unverified documents shown at the Langford Foundation event. One paper had already hinted at possible misuse of donor funds. It was just a crack, but I knew cracks spread. I woke early, long before the sun burned the fog off the rooftops, and went about my shift as if nothing had happened. In places like the one I worked, that was the safest move. Routine was camouflage. But by mid-morning, 2 men in black suits walked into the hotel lobby where I was polishing glasses. Their shoes were the kind that didn't creak. One scanned the room with lazy precision. The other walked straight to the counter. "We're looking for someone named." He glanced at a slip of paper. "You." I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped forward. "That's me. You'll come with us," he said. "Not a request." "Am I under arrest?" "No," he said, smiling without warmth. "Just a conversation." The manager was already sweating, mumbling something about how I was an excellent worker, but the suits ignored him. They walked me outside to a waiting car, dark windows and a smell of leather that felt too clean. Inside, Mrs. Langford sat with her legs crossed, perfectly composed. "Get in," she said. I slid into the seat, keeping my back straight. "You've made a mistake," she began, her tone calm but heavy. "That stunt you pulled, those files you think you understand, they're nothing but context stripped away. You've embarrassed me. Yes, but that will fade. What won't fade is what happens to you next." "You mean the threats?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "No, dear, the silence, the jobs you apply for that vanish. The friends who stop returning calls. The landlord who suddenly decides you're too much trouble. It's slower than you think. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already gone." I looked out the window, watching the city blur past. "You sound like you've done this before." Her voice softened. "You should be grateful. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Say you were mistaken. Say someone else planted it. I'll even let you keep your job. And if I don't, then you'll learn what it feels like to vanish. We drove in silence for a few blocks. Then I turned back to her. You built your life on people vanishing. I won't be one of them. Her eyes cooled. Then I hope you like the dark. The car stopped in front of the hotel. The men opened the door, and I stepped out without another word. The next few days were exactly as she'd promised, small changes that felt like coincidence if you weren't paying attention. The shift schedule at the hotel was cut. My landlord mentioned an inspection. My phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't know, only to hang up the moment I answered. But she'd underestimated one thing. I had no illusions left to break. And I'd been in the dark a long time. On the third day, I got a message from a reporter. Short, direct. We need to talk. Urgent. We met in the back booth of a diner far from downtown. She was in her mid-30s, sharp eyes, a pen in her hand, even when she wasn't writing. I know it was you, she said before the coffee even arrived. You left the folder in my coat. I didn't deny it. More's coming, she added. You need to see this. From her bag, she pulled out a stack of printouts, emails, transaction logs, letters. The documents I'd leaked were just the surface. What she had now showed an entire network. Shell companies, political donations hidden in charities, construction bids inflated threefold. Where did you get these? I asked. Someone else saw the slides at the gala. They came to me after your stunt. You started a chain reaction. I flipped through the papers, feeling the weight of them. This wasn't just scandal. It was rot all the way through the walls. She leaned in. They'll try to burn you for this. But if you're willing, we can make it impossible for them to close the door before the public sees it. I thought about it for a moment. We'll need to time it right, she nodded. And you'll need to go on record. Name, face, everything. The idea sent a chill through me. Being invisible had been my shield, but shields can also be cages. By the following week, the plan was set. We'd go public with the first wave, enough to force an official inquiry while holding back the rest as leverage. The reporter had contacts who could make sure it didn't vanish into bureaucracy. And when the day came, I would step forward, not as a shadow, but as a witness. The night before the release, I barely slept. I thought of the day Mrs. Langford had humiliated me in front of her friends, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I thought of the years I'd spent serving drinks to people who never once met my eyes. I thought of every time I'd been told to be grateful for scraps. And I thought of the moment the first truth would hit the air like a crack of thunder. The morning it went live, the air felt heavier. The reporter had warned me it would feel strange quiet, even right before the storm hit. She was right. I sat in my kitchen, the same cracked mug in my hands, the same peeling paint on the walls, while my face and voice spilled across news sites, social media feeds, and morning broadcasts. The footage was simple. Me, seated at her desk, speaking directly to the camera. My voice was steady, but you could hear the undercurrent years of being ignored, compressed into every word. I didn't embellish. I didn't shout. I just told what I had seen, what I had heard, and what I had found. I named names. I connected dots. And when I reached the end, I looked into the lens and said, they told me I would disappear. I'm still here. It spread faster than we expected. Within hours, the city's political offices were declining to comment. By midday, the Langford Foundation's website had gone offline for maintenance. And by evening, I was watching live footage of a press conference I hadn't dared to hope for. City auditors announcing a formal investigation into the misuse of charity funds. But victory doesn't feel like victory at first. The calls started almost immediately. Journalists, strangers thanking me, strangers threatening me. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 10 years, suddenly remembering my number. And in between them all, Silence from people I'd once thought were all eyes. That night, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Mrs. Langford was standing there. No suits this time. No driver waiting in the shadows. Just her, in a long coat, her hair pulled back. "You think this will save you?" she asked. Her voice had lost its polish. It was raw, like metal scraped on stone. "I don't need saving," I said. Her eyes flicked around my apartment, taking in the worn furniture, the uneven light. "You think they'll remember you when this is over? They'll take the story, twist it, move on, and you'll be nothing again." "Maybe," I said. "But for once, you'll have to live in the same air as the truth." She held my gaze for a long moment, then stepped back. "You're not special. You were just first." She left without another word. The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings, subpoenas, and headlines. I wasn't at the center anymore, thank God, but my name kept surfacing. Whistleblower. Witness. The city's power players kept trying to shift the focus, but every time they did, another piece of evidence emerged, snapping the spotlight back. I went back to work eventually. Not at the hotel, my shifts there, regrettably been filled, but at a small community center where people knew my name before they knew my story. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. One afternoon, months later, I was walking home when I saw her again, not Mrs. Langford, but one of the women who'd laughed at me that night at the gala. She was standing outside a courthouse, her coat pulled tight, reporters swarming her with questions. Our eyes met for a second. No words passed between us. But in her face, I saw at the first crack of recognition, not just of who I was, but of what I had done. And in that moment, I realized something. Justice isn't a grand finale. It's the quiet shift when someone who once looked through you now has to see you. It's knowing the next time they open their mouth to laugh at someone like you, they'll think twice. It doesn't erase the years of being invisible. It doesn't undo the hurt. But it plants something in the air respect, however grudging, that wasn't there before. Months later, the investigations were still unraveling. Some of the guilty had stepped down. Some had been charged. Others were still pretending they were untouchable. But none of them looked quite as tall anymore. As for me, I didn't go back to the shadows. Not because I craved attention, but because I had learned something they had never understood. Visibility isn't a gift they can grant or take away. It's something you claim, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands are empty. One evening, the reporter invited me to a small gathering at her office. No champagne, no speeches, just a table of cheap takeout and the people who had made sure the truth got out. She raised her glass of soda and said, "To those who refuse to vanish." And for the first time in a long time, I felt it not just survival, not just defiance, but a kind of victory that didn't need applause. Because the people who had tried to make me disappear now had to live in a world where I was undeniable. And that was enough.